Hello, good afternoon everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone present here. Thanks for joining us for the event on a panel discussion Budget 24-25. This talk is an initiative of MIDS Scholars Forum. MIDS Scholar Forum is a collective of MIDS PhD research scholars to engage in debates and discussion in the confluence of various social sciences disciplines. In this event, I take the opportunity to introduce the program and proceedings. The two main arms of the state, finance and polity, complementing each other or non-existing without each other too. Budget, the annual statement of the finances, produced before the legislative houses in democracies, carries the account of public earnings and expenditure impacting both the people and the state, crafting pathways and destinies to both the state and its people. This annual statement of the finances is the point of discussion today. The statement of the year 24-25 presented by the Union Government at the Parliament is the reason why we have gathered here. Without much further delay, I would like to introduce the speakers and I'll leave the floor for them. Speakers for this August afternoon, Dr. Kalaiyarasan. Dr. Kalaiyarasan is an assistant professor at MIDS. Previously, he was a Fulbright Nehru postdoctoral fellow at Watson Institute for International Public Affairs at Brown University. He also worked with National Institute of Labour, Economics, Research and Development, a research wing of NITI Aayog. He has received his PhD from JNU in Development Economics. Mr. C.K. Mohan is the president of TANSTIA, Tamil Nadu's Small and Tiny Industries Association. He is originally an electric engineer. After his stint at Best and Crompton Engineering for 15 years, in 1985 he started his own industries and ventured in MSMEs. He is an expert in aluminium welding and he's been involved in erection of electrical equipment in most power stations in South India. Mr. Suresh Seshadri is a national business editor at The Hindu, where he has been since September 2015. An old school print and wire journalist, he has spent almost 2 decades in Reuters and Bloomberg News. He is obsessive about accuracy and balance and the need to keep comments and opinions of daily newspaper reports. Also, the moderator for today's panel discussion, Professor L. Venkatachalam. He is professor at MIDS, also holding the RPA chair. He has also been the visiting faculty at IIT Madras School of Economics and Indian Maritime University, Chennai. He works on environmental economics with a focus on non-market valuation. So also to add, we also have a presentation from our research scholars, Arya and Aishwarya, who are PhD scholars at MIDS with their interest in environmental economics and intersection of gender, labor and welfare respectively. Without further delay, I open the floor to Arya and Aishwarya to provide an overview of the budget. Please.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Aishwarya and I am a PhD scholar at MIDS. I'd like to start the session by giving out some of the highlights of the economic survey so that we'll be able to understand the state of the economy and that will help us to scrutinize the budget based on the goals that are set out in the economic survey. So the economic survey estimates that the growth has happened of about 8.2% in real terms for the year financial year 2024, and it declares that the Indian economy is on a stable footing, demonstrating resilience in the face of geopolitical challenges. And some of the indicators that bear evidence for this, as given by the survey, are that the headline inflation rate is largely under control, the trade deficit is lower in the financial year, and the current account deficit for the year is around 0.7% of the GDP, and there is ample foreign exchange reserve. So it is in this positive note that the economic survey then points out that the economy continues to expand, and India is now the 5th largest economy with measuring about 3.6 trillion USD. And while the corporate profits as a percentage of GDP has reached a 15-year high, it has not resulted in commensurate increase in hiring and wages. And that has been an important point that is put out, and that also helps us to explain why this focus on employment that is given in the budget, because despite the economic growth, we have not seen rise in incomes or rise in employment opportunities. Can you hear? It's fine. Okay. The government now expects the private sector to invest more on machinery, equipment and intellectual property to create more and quality jobs. The positive aspect is that non-financial private sector capital formation, as measured in current prices, has expanded vigorously in the last financial year and despite a decline during the COVID times. However, investment in machinery and equipment have declined for 2 consecutive years, and that is why the government is now trying to incentivize capital sector investment largely. And the economic survey also pointed out that the economy continues to expand. Sustaining the overseas invested interest will be a challenge, and here it points to the turbulent climate in the international affairs, including wars and the rising interest rate in the developed countries as main challenges for India. So, and now it says that the baton has to be held by the private sector to create more employment, and jobs will have to be created there, and the state governments will have to do the heavy lifting. So it is in this light that we have to look at the union budget. So, and at the same time, the survey also points out that human development indicators have improved, even though those are debatable. And there is a need for the state to step back in terms of excessive regulation, especially of the small and medium enterprises, and that is a recognition of the need to unleash the growth potential of the small and medium enterprises. So the primary focus of the budget was on employment, skilling, MSMEs and the middle class, and 9 priority areas were identified, namely productivity and resilience in agriculture, employment and skilling, inclusive human resource development and social justice, manufacturing and services, urban development, energy security, infrastructure, innovation and next gen reforms. And the path towards fiscal consolidation is being lauded by everyone, as you would already know that the fiscal deficit has been brought down to 4.9% of the GDP. So that is an acknowledgement of the employment problem and a concerted effort towards generation of jobs. And this brings us to some of the debates and the questions that have arisen since the budget has been tabled in the parliament. And some questions regarding the major priority areas are the employment and skilling. So 3 employment-linked incentive schemes have been proposed with an outlay of about 2 lakh crore, which include direct cash benefits to employers and employees, an upgradation of 1,000 ITIs, and as well as an internship program in the top 500 companies. While this is a very much a welcome step in terms of employment generation in India, it also points to some of the questions such as this is a last mile problem, that is employment generation. So and it also points to whether the diagnosis of the employment situation is correct. So here the government is on this assumption that the problem with employment is that it costs more for the employer to hire an employee, and then skilling is the major issue, and therefore it is now trying to reduce the cost associated with hiring a new employee, and it is also pushing the private sector to invest in skilling and thereby being able to generate more employment. But some development economists are pointing out that the problem with the employment is also related to one of demand and lowering wages in the rural and the urban sector, and they have done little, and moreover these kind of deep tax cuts were even made in 2019, and they have done little to enhance the private sector capital expenditure, and moreover, and the fiscal stimulus was the reason to sustain the economic growth, and therefore this results in rising public sector debt to GDP ratio, and survey and the budget presume that the reduction in fiscal deficit and provision of supply side incentives would spur a virtuous investment cycle led by the private corporations. And now that is a question that will be posed to the panel, and we hope that we will be able to discuss it more. And the another positive aspect is that the MSMEs, which are known to be a more labor intensive sector of the economy, continue to get not only some credit incentives, which are also continuation of the policies of the last few years, and another important aspect is pointed out by development economists is that of demand, which is especially rural demand, and even the recent household consumption expenditure survey as well as the annual survey on unincorporated sector enterprises show lower levels of consumption and earnings amongst the bottom deciles of the population, and no concerted efforts have been proposed to improve the wages in the rural areas. And one related aspect that I would like to point out, which is actually found a place in the economic survey but has not been reflected in the budget, is that of care economy. So the economic survey points out that there is a need for creating a solid care economy in India, which has been lacking. There has no real vision been there in India for the creation of the care economy, but there is a need. According to the ILO, the care sector is one of the fastest growing sectors globally, and in India, direct public investment equivalent to 2% of the GDP has the potential to generate 11 million jobs, and nearly 90% of which would go to women. And therefore, this direct public investment equivalent to 2% of the GDP, which then talks about the onus of the government in creating jobs, which is now missing in the budget, because the budget largely talks about the role of the private sector in the creation of jobs, and it sidesteps or it underplays the role of the government here. And skilling can be solved, and one other instance where the market principles have been given importance is that the skilling can be solved through market interventions, while no doubt that these kind of schemes to improve, to ensure that employable citizens are, that citizens who are coming out, or these students who are coming out of colleges become employable, are very important. At the same time, this has to be juxtaposed with what is the allocation for school education and higher education. Whereas there has been only a nominal increase for school education of 500 crores, the higher education has received only about 3,000 crores, sorry, 5,000 crores and 3,000 crores. So one needs to look at the expenditure of capital expenditure along with that of social sector expenditure to understand how the fiscal consolidation path is being actually laid out. So even though the union budget highlights some significant promises and gaps in the social sector development, key promises include increased allocations for health, education and social welfare schemes. However, gaps remain in addressing the rural healthcare infrastructure, ensuring equitable education access and enhancing the social security for the vulnerable population. And many development economists have continued to pointing out the decreased in allocations for social welfare schemes, and this should not just be looked at as from the last financial year, but this has been a continuing trend for about a decade now. For example, MNREGA, a scheme that is providing rural employment, was allocated only 86,000 crore, which is 1.78% of the total outlay, which has been the lowest in the 9 years. And Pradhan Mantri Poshan Shakti Nirman has shown a slight increase in allocations, and this Poshan Abhiyan is related to the nutrition of women and children. The National Social Assistance Program, which includes the National Old Age Pension Scheme, the Indira Gandhi National Disability Pension Scheme, also have received only 0.2% of the total expenditure, and the Anganwadi and the Poshan Scheme for children under 5 have also seen only stagnant allocations. So what needs to be seen here is that the social sector spending has been marginally increased or large, but in terms of when we actually take into account the inflationary aspects, it's almost been stagnant. And one other issue that I'd like to flag here is that many of the food subsidy schemes continue to operate based on the census of 2011. So we actually do not know how many more people are actually in need of these food subsidies, and in this circumstances we are continuing to reduce the subsidies on food, and this is something that we need to take into account when we are scrutinizing the budget. And some of the gaps which I have already highlighted, and the welfare programs continue to remain underfunded, and moreover that the key question is how the government remained ignorant of this while doing very little to either labor intensive private capital or in incentivizing job creating sectors. Even though the focus is largely on agriculture, the focus has been on agriculture, there has not been much talk about how do you improve wages for women, and especially given that the labor force participation for women has actually increased in the agricultural sector. So even though there has been a huge unemployment problem, we have seen a rise in labor force participation for women, but that has largely come from women's participation in the unpaid labor in the rural sector, and therefore some of the employment schemes that are in the budget do not directly relate to this particular problem. So I'd like to end here, and I would like to ask my colleague Arya to continue with her analysis of the other sectors in the budget.
So good afternoon to all. I am Arya, research scholar from MIDS. So what I have done is I looked into the budget and put forth some of my thoughts in the form of questions, which might be thought-provoking to some, and for some others they might have already thought of these questions. But what I do hope is that by the end of this panel discussion, we might have answers to some of these questions. Let's see. So to begin with, the Finance Minister of India, Nirmala Sitharaman, presented the Union Budget 2024-25 on July 23rd, where she stated that in the next 2 years, the government will push 1 crore farmers to take up natural farming through the support of certification and branding. So my question here is whether a large-scale transition such as this will put the national food security at risk, The reason that I am raising this question is because since India has a large population and catering to their fast growing needs without conducting rigorous scientific tests before the implementation of such a scheme might make things difficult. For example, if you take the case study of Sri Lanka, a couple of years ago, the government there tried to implement organic farming and it faced a lot of challenges like the rise in the price of staple crops such as rice due to a lack of availability of natural fertilizers. And this led to a huge protest and political unrest in the country. Imagine if India had to face such a situation. The effects might be far worse than what it had happened in Sri Lanka. And also, according to a research study done jointly by ICAR and Indian Institute of Farming System Research, found that there has been a 59% decline in wheat yields and 32% decline in basmati rice yields when the zero budget natural farming was implemented instead of integrated crop management. Therefore, government needs to do a rigorous scientific test before implementing it on a large scale. Moving on, a second question that I want to raise regarding the agricultural sector is, was the budget overstated in terms of its announcement and understated in terms of its allocation? The reason that I am raising this question is because when it comes to the allocation of fund, there has been only a marginal increase in the allocation of funds to the Department of Agricultural Research and Education, which was 9,941 crore rupees as per the current budget estimates, whereas in the previous revised estimates, it was 9,877 crore rupees. That is, there has only been a marginal increase of 64 crore rupees. And when you come to the budget allocation for apex institutions like ICAR, Central Agricultural Universities and NAS, it is lower than the previous year's allocation. That is, there has been a marginal decrease of 145 crore rupees. Similar is the case for the National Mission on Natural Farming, which was allotted 366 crore rupees in the current year, which is lower when compared to the previous year's allocation of 459 crore rupees. And to my surprise, in the previous year's allocation, only 100 crore rupees was spent on the scheme. And if you take the case of PM Kisan scheme, where each landowning farmers receive 6,000 rupees every year, there has been no increase in the current year allocation. That is, it was same as that of the previous year's allocation, which is around 60,000 crore rupees. And this might have some unintended consequences such as the effectiveness of all cash transfer schemes which are not indexed to inflation might be questioned by the rural households. And also there is no evaluation of these schemes based on its impact on agricultural outcomes. Now moving on to the education sector, my question here is, shouldn't the budget have focused more on reducing the gap between financial planning and execution? The reason that I am raising this question is because in the case of Department of Science and Technology, there is only a marginal increase in the budget allocation when compared with the previous year's allocation. And in reality, it has utilized only 1/3 of the previously allotted fund. And contrary to the above, the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research has overspent its previous year's fund by 8%. And this time it has received only a 2% hike in its fund allocation, which is almost 6,323 crores. So there has been a mismatch in terms of financial planning and execution. And according to India's Innovation Index of 2021, India's gross expenditure is around 0.7% of GDP, which is significantly lower than the global average of 1.8%. Thus, I am quite skeptical about India's ability to meet its Vikasit Bharat 2047 goals. And also, there is an existing regional disparities in case of higher education, especially in the northeastern states, where its allocation increased marginally, that is a marginal increase of 68 crore rupees. Moving on, Professor Mohan of National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration stated that when compared with the budget estimate, there is only a marginal increase in percentage shares given to the educational sector. That is 4.2% for school education and less than 1% for higher education sector. Given that there is a rising enrollment in higher education, such inefficient allocation will ultimately lead to a decline in per student availability of public funds. And also, funding within the higher education is highly imbalanced. That is, major funding goes to research universities and allied institutions, whereas teaching universities and autonomous degree granting colleges are left with much lesser funds, and this can be quite concerning. And when it comes to the allocation of funds to social sciences and general academic disciplines, the funding remained insufficient, and this imbalance was not addressed by the budget. Take the case of ICSSR institutes such as MIDS, where the research scholars are not given sufficient fund for conducting their research. And even if they do get, it is only for a period of 2 years, which is low when compared with the elite institutions. And similar is the case of the faculties of these institutions, whose salaries have not yet been revised according to the 7th Pay Commission pay scale. And ultimately, despite the recommendation of Kothari Commission to spend 6% of GDP to education, the current spending remains between 2.7 to 2.9%. And this is a serious downfall from the side of government with respect to budget allocation. And moving on to the last sector, which is energy security. In the budget, Finance Minister stated that under the Prime Minister Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, the government was able to install rooftop solar plants for 1 crore households who could ultimately obtain free electricity up to 300 units every month. My question here is, was the budget able to reduce critical gaps concerning the energy sector reforms? The reason that I am raising this question is because a month prior to the budget announcement, on June 30th, 2024, there was an article in the Hindu regarding this scheme where it showed evidences of lack of implementation of the scheme in Telangana due to web portal issues. The article stated that between February 13th to June 28th this year, a total of 62,260 registrations were done on the national portal of the scheme, and out of these, only 1,451 applicants completed their work and 875 got the net metering completed. But notable is the fact that not a single applicant got the subsidy so far under the scheme, and this is quite contrary to what the Finance Minister had said in her budget speech. And in addition to this, budget was silent on the extension of interstate transmission charges for offshore wind power projects, which expires in June 2025. And also there was no relief for tariff charges in the current budget. Finally, there was not much discussion on improving the fiscal health of DISCOMs, which can ultimately become an Achilles heel of the energy transition sector. So to conclude with, what I'm trying to say is the current budget did not even meet the crucial needs of the above sectors, leaving its stakeholders with a sense of disappointment and unfulfilled promises. Thank you.
I would like to thank all my colleagues for their insightful overview of the budget and questions that have been put forth over the panel. So now I invite our guests to take over the chairs. Also, our moderator to please join us. I would request Dr. L. Venkatachalam to start with his opening remarks.
Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you for this panel discussion on Union Budget 24-25. So let me just begin with my introductory remarks. So I am basically an economic theoretician. So let me start with some economic theory behind budget. There are economists belonging to Austrian school like von Hayek, James Buchanan, all these people who very strongly think that the government should not intervene in the private activities because they take the libertarian position to promote welfare of the people, right? Because their argument is that, take for example India. India has 140 million people, 40 crore people, and the government, which has only a very few ministers and bureaucrats, could not understand the 140 crore mental models that prevail in the country actually. Okay, so therefore, each individual will have different kind of interest, different kind of motives, all those kinds of things. So therefore they say that let us minimize the government intervention and allow the market institutions to play a role in coordinating activities among the individuals by way of maximizing their welfare. Indeed, this kind of idea has been implemented by Ronald Reagan in America, Margaret Thatcher in UK. These models have been also successful. But over a period of time, what we have found is that there are some kind of criticism about this idea, namely allowing the market to operate and minimizing the role of government in economic activities. This kind of criticism comes from Keynesians basically, and they say that there should be a strong government role in promoting the welfare of the people because there are distortions in the economies, asymmetric information, public goods provision, all those kinds of things require more government intervention. And if you look at this budget, basically, I feel that there is strong government intervention in terms of promoting the interests of different walks of people in the country. Take, for example, the budget focuses on empowering women, youth, middle class, industry, especially MSME, farmers, students who are going to get the internship kind of fellowship and all, right? So it focuses on promoting the welfare of all walks of people in the country, and therefore one can conclude that the government is trying to be everywhere, right? Even though the budget focuses on various actors in the economy, the actors will not get satisfied, right? So sometimes we also find some kind of contradictions. For example, as Ms. Arya rightly pointed out, on the one hand, government is trying to improve the skills of the people, right? On the other hand, it is trying to kill the skills of people in ICSR institutions, right? So this is, there are various contradictions. For example, in the case of promoting again the natural farming, so where do you get the inputs from? For example, 50 years back, 60 years back, in rural areas, you find a lot of livestock, okay? Even though, the people were maintaining native livestock, which used to give only limited amount of output, milk, etc. They used to give a lot of manure actually. So the agriculture was dependent largely on the natural manure because of the volume of the number of livestock maintained by the people in rural areas. And you had also grazing land for this livestock to kind of graze. And now all these grazing lands, which are called common property resources, have disappeared. And therefore now the exotic variety has replaced all the native varieties, okay? And you also found some kind of institutions to maintain the livestock population in rural areas. For example, you used to have a kind of bonded laborers who will take care of the large number of livestock owned by the households. So that kind of institutional arrangement was very much there to support the natural farming system in the past. But now we are talking about natural farming, but where do you get the kinds of inputs that are required for doing natural farming? Okay, so if you look deeper into various kinds of policy announcements that are available in the budget, you will find certain contradictions also. But however, the budget, sometimes what we see is that politicians immediately after the budget is presented, they make kind of criticisms. Usually most of the politicians make sweeping statements about the budget, okay? Now there is a polarization among the politicians also in terms of criticizing or supporting the policies of the government. But the budget, it's very difficult to kind of prepare the budget. Even for one day program, we could not make the budget properly, and we have a lot of difficulties, let alone talk about making the budget for the entire nation consisting of 140 crore people for the entire year. Okay, it's a very difficult task, and therefore it should be criticized, kind of with the substantive comments. And in order to critically look at the budget, some of the components of the budget, we have three eminent speakers here. Dr. Kalaiyarasan from MIDS, Mr. C.K. Mohan from industry sector, and Mr. Suresh Seshadri from the media. And so let us listen to them. And what I would like to suggest is that each speaker can take 15 minutes to air our ideas, and then at the end we will have discussion, right? So now I would like to request, maybe on the basis of seniority, I would like to request Mr. C.K. Mohan to give your ideas. Thank you.
Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really honored to be here amongst you, all youngsters. I am from the industry, so I don't talk your language of economics. Mine will be very plain and simple. I'll be talking more on the MSMEs rather than other areas. Before I get into the budget itself, there are certain demands which you have given to the government for pre-budget. One is a thing which has been there for quite long. NPA, as all must be knowing, that non-performance this accounts. That is, if you don't pay your interest even for 90 days, you will be considered as NPA. So this is a norm. Earlier it used to be 180 days. Your MSMEs are earlier until now is not growing, even maybe the number is more still. They are not growing in the right way. It is because of the delay in payment by the corporates, PSUs and whatnot. This is a major issue which has been there quite long, which has been, I don't know, they say Basel II norms, so they have signed it so they cannot change this 90 to 180. This has been a regular thing. Unless something else is done to take care of the delay in payment, industry will not survive of any amount of your other initiatives by the government. This is the problem of the MSMEs. The bigger companies.
Trends is there. Trends. Trade discount and receivable.
No, I'll tell you. I'll come to that. Most of the bigger companies, how they bring their funds, either foreign investments or public funds. There is no interest element. It should be very, very minor. What happens to an MSME? He has to borrow from the bank. There is no other option because the initial amount, whatever from the family, is invested in the initial stages. After which, anything for the growth, he has to borrow money. Today, the cost of the finance is very high for the MSMEs in India. You take any other, this thing is hardly maximum 4% anywhere else. But in India, by taking it from the bank, it varies from 10% to 18% minimum. That kind of profitability is just not there. The moment you delay payment, the moment you delay, all your profits are gone. That is where most of the industry is going sick. This is a major issue which is, yes, government is trying to take some measures. Especially this time they have addressed some of the issues, not fully. One of them, again, another one which we have been telling. See, there is easy to start an industry. You put all your money, you start an industry, borrow, you give your collateral, you start. Running is an impossible thing. So you want to quit, you can't do it. You can't do it. They will be after you even after your closure. After 10 years they will be after you. Yes, PF, your loan, this, that. So on this, about this 90 days, after 90 days, there's a SARFAESI Act for the MSMEs. They have done so much of liberalization with regard to medium sector and above. NCLT they have brought in where there's a way of coming out by the management. Here, most of them are proprietors, small-time investors, people who have had the experience and then start and do that. See, most of them, they don't have a financial management expertise. They know how to create this thing. They will, whatever you want, they will do it. But when it comes to that, they don't know. And most of them are proprietors. They don't become partners or LLPs like that to grow. It is possible. But they don't do that. Because of that, they fail and they will not know how to get out. The SARFAESI Act, what it means is, they will remove it from the bank and they will give it to the revenue recovery agency. Once it goes there, bank has nothing to do with that. Then the collateral is being auctioned. See, the problem is today, whatever you have, small investment as your house or property, is being auctioned. Even that auction, the bankers are not able to realize what they are supposed to realize. So the SARFAESI Act itself is bad. You should allow me to come out with whatever this one-time settlement, sell my property, give it to the bank and come out. This is what. Then another problem is in India is once you exit with all that you pay something and come out, you cannot start another industry. Having failed, you can still, you know you are an expert now. You will not do mistakes, but you cannot start today. The moment their CIBIL comes in. The CIBIL rating is one of the worst things that can happen in India today. Sir,
who evaluates that CIBIL rating?
Government. It is a Reserve Bank. CIBIL is even 500 rupees you have not paid to a credit card some 8 years back, it will reflect in your rating. So, you know, there was a time, few years back, some people used to have 10 cards. Without their knowledge, it's all dumped and they have taken. To come out, what they do, they pay some amount one-time settlement. This results in reducing the credit rate.
But this budget has done something of self-evaluation, changing the
That is where, yeah, I'll tell you this. Reserve Bank also we have been interacting, and all our this thing is, there should be a separate, CIBIL has to be revisited, there should be one more this thing is, every bank has got their own credit rating system. What happens is, if I don't pay my term loan for a few days later, there's a credit, your comes down. Then you don't pay your interest after a week, then your rating comes down. Because of that, in paper, they take you a signature for 10%, 9.5% is the bank rate. But actually, they charge you 18% because your rating comes down because of your certain delay. Why this is happening? It is purely because the MSMEs are not getting their payment in time. This is a major issue. I buy the material, conversion 45 days or 1 month, then I give it to the customer. He takes as per the rule 45 days, then it comes to payment, he will not pay you in time. Then he takes another 45 days. There are methods of doing this. After 45 days, they have their own finance companies. They create their own finance companies, buy a public fund, and they discount this bill for another 45 days. They really suck your blood. So what happens, see, any trader, there's a difference between a trader and a manufacturer. Trader converts his money every day. Even if he sells, if it's 30 lakhs is the turnover, every day he turns out whatever that is by getting back his money. Even if it's 2% profit, he makes 50% is the amount what they make. But for a manufacturer, 30 days is the period which you buy material, convert it, giving it to the. So almost 4 to 5 months, how many times you will be rolling it? What is the percentage of profit you can keep it? Even if it is 25%, you will not survive. This is what is happening in India. So that is where the government is also trying to address. One is the TRED scheme. TRED is one of the best schemes which has evolved over the period, but it is there for the past 10 years. But still the number is, for the country like this, having crores of industries, the TRED is only few thousands of people have discounted. But needs to be expanded, awareness has to be created. In that direction, government has done. One is, I have been asking for the threshold limit, that's called the mandatory. TREDs, all the PSUs now has to have under mandatory with the TREDs. So they have to have that. What happened? They have made it 500 crores a turnover, which is not enough. I said 50 crore. Even the 50 crore fellow cheats. Fellow who is doing 10 lakh. Don't do that. 50 crore mandatory. They have to be in this platform. But they have to expand this platform. This, whatever the system available is not enough. They have to expand this. So now they have made it as 250. From 500 they brought it down to 250. It is mandatory. They cannot. One more area they have addressed is Income Tax Act 14BH. Recently they have modified the act. There, anybody, all the big companies, in a balance sheet, anybody for that matter, balance sheet they have to tell your creditors. All these creditors, they are all GST, non-GST, everything has to be there. So if that GST, it will show that 45 days or not. You have not paid that customer for 45 days. It will be showing that as per the bill. Then this particular amount will be considered as expenses, not as, will not be considered as expenses. You have to pay income tax for that. This is a new amendment which is welcome, which some of the corporates are trying to dilute, which you have opposed. This way, the industry will get their payment in time. So that also the government is addressing to certain extent. And similarly, the what happens is the Credit Guarantee Fund Trust Scheme, which they have again addressed in the budget. See, earlier what happened, if I am a very good unit, I am having a bank account. What happened in the COVID time? They announced 2.5 lakh crore rupees as a Credit Guarantee Fund Trust. In that, they wanted to help the MSMEs. Ultimately, what happened? If I am a good unit, having some 5 crore this thing, they call, I will give you another 1 crore in this scheme. The collateral is already available for 10 crores. Right? In this scheme, I will give you 1 crore. It is only for those people it was given, target was taken, not for the fellow who is in need. He was not given. This is how they have given. They called the good account holders, given them extra, giving the scheme, because they know that the collateral is safe. This is how they have done it. So that is where the new MSME, they have said, they are going to create a separate CGTMSE for manufacturing sector. Because the moment you say, now the problem is, with the Udayam scheme coming into the picture, even traders are into it. For the bank, finance alone they can. So what happens? Everybody gets into that. So they have created a separate CGTMSE for manufacturing sector. It's a welcome move. Similarly, stressed account. What again I have told you that 90 days it's a stressed account. For that they are creating a new fund for that period alone. So that's only when it comes in paper we will know what exactly the methodology and what not. Otherwise, yes, they are trying to address that area. Similarly, one is the GST. Recently, we have got one Samadhan scheme where the initial stages, the government doesn't know what is to be done, the customer doesn't know what is to be done, the auditor doesn't know what is to be done. 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. The audit is being done now. sending lakhs and lakhs of people notices that you have to pay so much of balance. I mean, you have done some mistake, you have to pay some money, plus fine, plus interest, plus fine. If it is 3 lakhs, they have to pay 6 lakhs. If it is 30 lakhs, almost 60 lakhs. From where they will pay for the mistakes what they have done. Because even the government doesn't know, the whole system was wrong. They have evolved now, so many corrections have been made. Now you are asking them to pay. That they have made it recently, that Samadhan scheme they are given, saying that only whatever the claim you have to pay, the balance, interest and this thing need not. See, this way they will be killing the MSME industries one by one. See, you can't be having, today the taxes have gone up, everything has gone up. All these things are not reflected in their price immediately. I can't go to my customer saying that it has gone up, so increase, give me the increase. Not possible, because the competition is so severe. So I have to hold it for some time, then only it is possible. So that way competitiveness comes down. All these factors. Civil have covered, trades have covered. These are all they have addressed. Interest rate again needs to be addressed. They have not done anything on that. See, it's a RBI subject still. The interest is a big burden on MSMEs by any standards. It has to be very transparent, simple, and they have to do something towards bringing down this thing. There is no, if you see earlier, there used to be a scheme where interest subvention is there. Now it is not there. Then earlier they used to give a subsidy for the any technology upgradation, which is stopped for the past 2 years. It has not been revived at all. So these are all the areas where the MSMEs used to buy machineries for any expansion, any technology, this thing, which is not given. That again has not been addressed. Bank problems are many. Again, it's not. All bank problems, collateral, CGTMS. When it comes to real budget, I have already addressed credit guarantee scheme during stress period. Trades, yes, we welcome. SIDBI is going to start some 100 new branches. SIDBI has been mainly meant for small industries. They have been doing very well all these years, good. But the problem is they don't normally give any, like any other commercial banks, they don't give working capital. And they have very few branches. So somebody from Dindivanam will not be able to have some bank account and but now they are trying to do connecting with other banks. They are giving to working capital also, and they are increasing number. The idea, I mean, the advantage of SIDBI is the interest rates are lesser by 2% than any other commercial bank. So SIDBI that way it's doing very well. That e-commerce export hub, there for MSMEs they are addressed it. And plug and play industrial park with complete infrastructure. Actually, this is being done with the state government intervention. Is being done as of now, right now. But what is happening is it is not really plug and play. They just develop some land, they create some basic infrastructure. There is no substation, there is no STP, there is no other solar power or any other this thing, and no other this thing. There is no hostel for employees. All this thing they say plug and play. It's just not there. They just create a land and allot it. Afterwards, it's your botheration to get the power. See, the power, getting power from the local authorities is a big problem. It involves corruption, delay, and whatever the money you are investing, there are industrial estates that have started 10 years back. Even now, they don't have a substation. Then they have to be on the generator. What will be the cost of the power? So this, even though they have announced it, they are doing it, but the quality of this need to be looked at. It is not as simple as that they have told. Dormitory accommodation. Dormitory accommodation is because now Tamil Nadu as it is, we depend on most of the guest workers, whatever we call Bihar, Orissa. So that's a major issue for which all along it is only left to the entrepreneurs to see. Entrepreneur who's got some 50 workers, already he has a small place to manufacture. He will not have place to take care of them in that this dormitory. So now they are addressing one first in Ambattur they have started. It's all from the central government funded. It is not state government, central government funded. They have started in Ambattur. Hosur they are trying to start in Coimbatore. That's a welcome move. The solar rooftop, actually, time is up. No, it's okay. Solar rooftop, saying you are all talking about domestic, this thing, they are giving some incentives. Why not for the industries? Both central and state government is not, see, you should, for me, if I am able to produce my own power, yes, you can purchase power from the solar manufacturers and transmit. What happens there also for transmission, the government is asking money. And net metering, again a big problem. So instead, you allow the solar power manufacturing for the industries with more incentives that will save our energy. They have also addressed some of the artisan, traditional industries. It is definitely they need some hand holding with respect to the modernization, energy saving, all these things. They are all suffering a lot. So even though it's a small one, but needs to be done. Indirect taxes, they have promised to rationalize the GST structure. Now you have 4. 3 is an ideal one which we have been asking. Hopefully it is done soon. And customs duty, they have done so many areas, they have done it. There are so many details of that, I don't want to being timed this thing. They are all welcome move because it is make in India this thing. In that direction they have taken all these things, reduce custom duty so that more people, manufacturing this thing can be increased. Only that area they have done it. For chemicals, some of the investment machineries, all that. It is welcome move. Direct taxes, yes, simplification. Angel tax, abolishing angel tax is one of the best thing which, yes, address for the new entrepreneurs so that investment will come. Standard deductions. The limit, Mudra loan, it's a wonderful this thing, I'm telling you. People used to get 5 lakhs loan, 5 lakhs, even 50,000 rupees. The number of beneficiaries are huge and the NPA rate is hardly 3%. One of the best policies for the small vendors, now they have increased it to 20 lakhs. Again, it's a welcome move. There are many, I think other panel members are there to address and thank you for the opportunity. Anything on the industry, yes, I will be able.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for highlighting various issues faced by MSME as well as various measures taken by the central government to address some of these issues. So we will get back to you with questions from the audience. And now we will move on to the next speaker, Mr. Suresh Seshadri from the Hindu.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to this annual discussion on the budget. Can you hear me now? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me for this panel discussion. We have some, like I was just telling your director earlier when I met him, we have people who are academics from MIDS itself and both Dr. Venkatachalam and Dr. Kalaiyarasan, and we have Mr. Mohan from Industry Real Economy. I'm usually on this side trying to report on what they would say and then going back and reporting the news, so asking me to sort of also talk to you all, and you all are all PhD scholars, so it's a little daunting, but I'm going to try and make a fist of it. What I can say is that probably it's always interesting when on budget day I have this unenviable task of having to write what's called a long editorial. And you're writing that editorial, commenting on the budget within hours of the budget, having been presented. And it's always a big challenge, because how do you sort of, in a concise way, manage to capture and say something which you can't just recount what the budget has said, but you're also trying to make a critical comment or a studied comment on what the budget was trying to do. So this year when we wrote the budget editorial, the whole thing which we ended up saying was that it's made an attempt at trying to ensure that it meets many people's interests, and at the same time tries to stick to its path of fiscal consolidation, which is a sort of leitmotif with this particular government and this particular, should I say, regime. I think the NDA has not just this year, but over the last 11 years, it's been something very consistent with them, is that they have sought to drive through fiscal consolidation. There are those who believe that that's a very good thing, and there are those who believe that taking fiscal consolidation to an obsessive level is also going to be counterproductive. Like, for instance, during the height of COVID, we saw that there were countries like, for instance, the US problems of inflation, and more recently the problems they have had with cash sloshing around, which has also fed into inflation in other parts of the world, has been because of all the surplus money which was given out during the COVID times to address the issues that were there in the economy. And it's not just the US, a lot of European economies also gave out cash to segments of the economy where people who couldn't go into work and so on. So they wanted to buffer people from the economic hardship of the pandemics, lockdowns and so on. India sort of did the other thing. We literally sort of were in denial mode, which is why we saw mass exodus of workers. The same guest workers, migrant workers were suddenly out on a limb in the lurch. I'm sort of digressing, but the key point I'm trying to make is that the budget making as a policy is one thing. The other is the political economy aspect. Sometimes when we make budgets and when we try to drive through an ideological position, fiscal rectitude is one thing. Fiscal rectitude at the cost of everything else is probably, it's like an OCD, a person with OCD. So this regime's obsession with fiscal rectitude is something which we do need to question, because what is it that you're achieving in real terms? For instance, when it comes to the employment aspect, you've come out with a lot of, this time, clearly the fact that before this budget, which was presented in July as opposed to normally February, is because there was a general election in the interim. And the outcome of the general election did get manifested in the budget itself. Clearly the fact that there was a setback to the largest constituent of the NDA, the BJP, sort of suffered a setback in terms of from 400 par to whatever they got, was partly because of the fact that there was a groundswell of angst and disappointment with various segments of people. The farmers were upset about the lack of an MSP guarantee. There is a lot of unemployment, so large demographic of youth fairly, should I say, disenchanted. So disenchantment, and of course inflation, while the finance minister can claim that inflation has been under control. We know what the RBI is doing. In fact, right now today as we speak, they've started their policy meeting. The Monetary Policy Committee has started its 3-day meeting. So day after tomorrow we will know exactly what they're going to do. Most likely they will hold rates. If at all, I'm sure they're not going to increase rates, but there's no chance in hell that they're going to, sort of cut rates at this point in time. So, and that's because, as you know, four wise men in that 6-member panel keep saying, inflation is something which you can't sort of negotiate with, because it's eating up everybody's capacity to consume, everybody's capacity to, the same amount of money which you're earning today, what it's buying you out in the market, especially for those who don't have protections, who are living on marginal incomes, is significant. So clearly, well, the government might try to say that we have done well on inflation. It's just largely a claim. In And so the number is not just the headline number, but what it's doing in real terms, in terms of, should I say, diminishing consumptive capacity in the economy is a very key element which we all have to keep in the backdrop when we look at what they're doing. So in that sense, if you look at what they've done with their employment approach to addressing employment, redressing the lack of jobs being created. So it has been largely jobless growth, as both Aishwarya and Arya mentioned. It's been we've had PLI schemes, we've had different kinds of approaches to try and of course 2019 was a big corporate tax cut which the finance minister announced at that point in time, because pre-COVID itself there was this huge slowing down which was happening. Now, okay, we accept that COVID sort of threw everything out of the window, but I don't think even today the corporate tax cut has sort of ended up in any way feeding itself into the real economy in terms of ensuring that the private corporate sector has been in a position to create more jobs or create more employment. And it's a complicated problem. I mean, if you ask industry captains, they're going to say we don't have the labor market, doesn't have factors of production. They're going to say labor market, there are issues. So unless you address the real issues in the labor market and ability for us to have hire and fire policies, we can't do much. Then they'll say other factors of production. Land Acquisition Act was, I think in 2015 or 16 they sort of brought it up and then they shelved it. Various political blowback and so on. So again, they're going to say, large industry is going to say that we have issues why we can't invest surpluses and create more jobs or create more capacity, because issues with land acquisition, issues with labor and so on are still not addressed from a policy perspective, and therefore our hands are tied. But that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is, what is happening to profitability and so on and so forth. And there again, like both the research scholars mentioned, the crux of the issue is consumptive capacity in the economy. We have clearly been seeing that private, PFC, private family consumption expenditure, as a percentage of GDP, has been on the decline and continues to be on the decline. And why is that? So I think a large part of that is because real incomes aren't increasing. Real ability on the part of the people to, and the number of people, we are having a demographic situation where more people are going out of, so the elderly, for instance, we are having a twin problem of a lot of people coming into the productive labor force, not getting jobs. A lot of people, the elderly, the geriatric problem has also begun now in India. So we are having significant cohorts of people whose ability to contribute to the productive economy is diminishing. Not because, like I said, the youth don't have jobs. The elderly, they're retiring and going out, so they're not any longer in the productive thing. So they are now needing to be either cared for, or they themselves are living on relatively, those who have pensions, okay, fine, but those who don't have pensions from the private sector, they're now dipping into their savings. So how do they then ensure that their consumptive capacity is going to be on the decline? And then, of course, things like healthcare costs. So has the budget done enough on social sector where it concerns the healthcare costs? Healthcare costs are something, again, which are sort of rising manifold, have risen manifold and continue to rise at a very rapid rate. And has there been any ability or attempt on the part of the budget over the last few years to address this huge jump in healthcare costs? Is something which we need to interrogate a little more closely, examine and interrogate a little more closely. There was that scheme which the Prime Minister's, forget the name of the scheme, these are all mnemonics which they keep finding, and everything is attributed to the Prime Minister. But ultimately, what is the real outcome on the ground? Especially in the rural heartland where a large majority of the people live, there is distress, and then part of the distress is attributable to the fact that the government vacated to a large extent over the decades its role in healthcare. The outlays on healthcare have consistently declined, and government's role in healthcare has sort of been, it's not any longer our job. And in the urban areas, those who have social capital are all today consumers of private healthcare. The last time anyone in this room went to Omandura or RGH, Rajiv Gandhi Government Hospital, or even the Corporation Hospital in Adyar, probably we went for a COVID shot or something. But we've really not been, no fault of ours, but there is a neighborhood private doctor, there's a neighborhood private hospital. So if you fall sick or if you have an injury, you are obviously going to go to the nearest private hospital rather than a government hospital. And Tamil Nadu and Kerala, for instance, states where the government health sector are relatively very well funded, relatively better off, there's still good equipment, there's still some very good professionals who are still there.
Sure.
So the quality of care is going to be absolutely on a par almost with the private sector. But still, I think it's a switch which has been thrown in the head that from a perception standpoint that you might get better care in the private sector as opposed to the government sector. Probably things like the hygiene in the wards may not be optimal. You may find clean, not so clean hospital beds if you end up having to be hospitalized and so on. So it's these apprehensions which have sort of fed into a lot of people with social capital, and we are today loath to go into a government hospital. Now, whereas in a rural setting, the availability of quality, even private healthcare is at a premium. There aren't enough facilities because anyone who is qualified is going to try and come to a city and try and make his or her money or their living actually. Let's be also fair to the healthcare professionals. So there is that vacuum in the rural area, and the government has vacated this space without doing much to address it. So it's not just providing rural health insurance. I think long back when Mr. Ramdas, the junior, Dr. Andoni Ramdas was the health minister, he did talk about trying to address this, but I don't think anything much has, there was a National Rural Health Commission and so on, but I don't know whether there had really been significant outlays and significant improvements in on the ground, providing tertiary care. And because we all remember, unfortunately, but it's not just in UP, the Gorakhpur incident and what happened with those children dying because of lack of oxygen and so on. So, and it's not just, these are not just anecdotes of tragedies. There is more, while unreported, a lot of lack of reporting doesn't mean that it's not, there, exactly. So the problems are still there, and problems are fairly widespread. So healthcare is a concern, education is a concern, as both of you spoke about. Manrega rural job guarantee scheme has got defunded. So why I'm coming to all these things is fiscal rectitude. So you maintain your fiscal rectitude, but are you able to then ensure that key areas which do need funding, how are you going to ensure that they are funded? So sometimes probably it might be, and then of course the whole issue of what is the big policy picture that you have. Since 91's budget, when 91's budget, the flip side of it, you can argue that it was forced on India and forced on the then Prime Minister, Finance Minister combination by circumstances. The fact that we were really facing a serious crisis of, we had to put our gold in the Bank of England and so on. So you were facing a serious sovereign debt, and you didn't have enough foreign exchange reserves to pay for more than, I think, 45 days of purchases and so on. So that probably forced you to think out of the box. But the fact was, after that particular budget, there have been other budgets. There was one budget in 97, I think, Mr. Chidambaram, which was called a dream budget and so on. But there haven't really been significant budgets which have had a big picture imagination where policy making says, let me make a break from the past, let me come up with something, even if it's just one small idea, I focus on that. So there was, I was just looking at the history of budget speeches, and there was, H.M. Patel had presented an 800-word budget. So it's not the number of words in the budget that matter as much as what you say in those few words or no words. Brevity can often be the soul of wit, and you can just say that I'm going to present a budget which has focus on, say, 2 or 3 core areas, and I really ensure that we not only present them as policy perspectives, but we also implement them. We drive through change, and we ensure that when it comes to the end of the year, the next fiscal year, the next budget, the next economic survey, we're able to look back at the past budget, and the difference between BE and RE is sort of not significant. RE outcomes, we have an outcome budget where the outcomes are seen to be meaningful for each of those areas where we focused on. So, these are areas where I think there has been a paucity of thinking on the part of different finance ministers. And of course, it's not just the finance ministers probably signing off on it, but there are all these brilliant bureaucrats who are sitting up there in the Ministry of Finance who Department of Economic Affairs, Chief Economic Advisor, they're all there. So it's not as if we lack the brain power and the grey skill, grey matter resources to do this, but I don't know why, but I think it's some, there's a very templated approach to budget making, which is also a serious concern. I think I'll stop at this point and
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, Kalaiyarasan. So PowerPoint.
yeah, but then you can't do it because it's misused. You have to address the fix it. Refunding is not the solution because
Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon, evening. Yeah. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. And my job is going to be a little tough, but also a bit easier too. In the sense, of course, thanks Arya and Aishwarya offered an overview of the budget, which is what I was thinking of doing partly. And also, Mr. Suresh really wonderfully provided perspective to see the budget. Because the numbers, so many noises in numbers, right? You have to get the numbers and put it in some conceptual way to think. And of course, Mr. C.K. Mohan offered a regulatory reform that's taking place, particularly in MSME. So what I'm going to do in the talk, I thought initially I'll offer a broad outline, but what I'm going to do is to put this all together in a pedagogical way. As a student, how do we approach the budget? What budget means for not just for an economist or understanding it, for even as a discipline. We all work in economic discipline. How do we understand numbers? How do you understand the budget document? What budget does? So as you know, before every budget, you have something called economic survey. The previous day, exactly if you remember, it's for students. The previous day you get a budget, the economic survey, which is roughly around this year. If you look at the Anand Nagesh done a wonderful job providing some 550 pages. It provides kind of what we call as a diagnosis. If you go to the doctor, you get the patient, right? What's your condition? It provided a broader diagnosis. So most of the numbers that I'm going to offer come from the diagnosis report. So next, the solution, which is supposed to be the next day in the budget, whether it reflects the disease, the diagnosed in the previous day of the survey. That's a job of us. So with this two document, put the two document in a conceptual framework as we economists understand, because they are policy makers, but how do we economists understand? So this order, I'm going to provide a broadly as the state of the economy based on the survey, and how do we read the budget from this survey, from the diagnosis, and key takeaways, which already been summarized, but I'll make a few with respect to employment, structural transformation, particularly in the longer run. How do you see this budget? What direction it's taking us? So now, if you look at the budget, in both the economic survey, also the finance minister mentioned, it's a longer speech, we should appreciate that. That also the woman finance minister, 6 terms, it's wonderful that way, it's great at that sense. And it offered definitely both budget speech as well as the economic survey offered our macro fundamentals are strong. In the sense, our growth rates are broader, particularly 7+, and the production is also much better. In fact, we have recovered much faster than most of the economy from the COVID. India is one of those economy. And also our inflation rate under control, but except the food inflation as Mr. Suresh mentioned, the food inflation still is important. When you think of purchasing power, you need to think of the food inflation is a key. So this macro fundamentals are in order. But I use this as an analogy. Think of as you are driving a car, assuming your parameters, all your fuel and speedometer, everything in order. Looks like your car is in perfect. That's what you have been told by looking at the macro fundamentals. As an economist, you have to use some brain of the mechanic, looking at the sound. What actually is there inside? Is there anything fundamentally good or something is wrong inside? Is there anything going on, which actually you need to have some kind of techniques. That's what the economist's job is, to understand that noise, something is happening in that. So how do you do it? Disaggregate the budget. If you look at the macroeconomics, what you have is the big identities. This is called macroeconomic identities. What here on the left hand side is Y. Y is nothing but an output, GDP. You calculate the growth rate. The next component, which is an important component for the growth, is your consumption. The second is investment. I is your investment. G is the government as a share or government purchase. And the fourth is your export and import if it is an open economy. So now, what actually drives the growth? If you disaggregate each of these components, then you get to know what drives the growth. Is there any problem with our economy? Then whether budget addresses that problem. So this I'm just using as a pedagogical approach for the students to get this. Let's take up the first part of the consumption. Is that okay with the consumption? So looks at, if you look at the overall period of time, our consumption has been private consumption in particular, which is represented in the C in the macroeconomic identity, has been stagnant, which is reported in the survey also, in the economic survey too. And how do you test this? Either you get the numbers, look at the overall growth rate, or you can look at some proxy of the consumption baskets. Take for instance one of the baskets, let's say the car or the two-wheeler. Two-wheeler is assuming as a middle class or the lower middle class consumption. Look at the trend of the you can see the left hand side of the two bars, which is based on the years, and the 179 represents the recent year for the two-wheelers, which is 179 lakh or something. And similarly on the passenger vehicle, if you take these cars. And you clearly see it is definitely growing last few years, but hasn't picked up if you look at the pre-COVID time. It is still in absolute numbers, less than your pre-COVID times. So in a way, it also reflects partly of your recovery, but your recovery is not enough to go back even to your original position. That's partly is well documented. You could look at the numbers, this is the consumption numbers, which you can also verify these numbers via if you look at, talk to the guys who sell FMCG goods, which is largely consumed by. What is the turnover last few years? Is it a turnover in sync with your growth rate? If you are assuming your growth rate is 6.9%, whether the FMCG is growing at the same rate or less than that rate. So if that is growing at the same rate, your share should have been a little picked up, but it doesn't show in your the consumption check. Something is matched, it's not going exactly right. So something that is stagnant, but definitely there is an upstick. We should appreciate that, previous year compared to, definitely there is an upstick, but not if you compare with your pre-COVID times. This is with respect to consumption, which you can also look at this question through from the entrepreneurs of the entrepreneurs or from the factory side, whether our factories are running at full capacity. Remember again, your Y in the left hand side is the production function. That's the capacity of the economy. If the economy is running in the full throttle, then your capacity should have been at least 90 plus or 100. What's your capacity of the utilization of your factories? It has been roughly around 73% for a long time, which is last 10 years, which is called as a stagnancy in the manufacturing, which clearly reflected in the manufacturing data if you look at. But even in recent time, the current year of the 2013 and 2014 from RBI data, it is 74%. So it doesn't improve, but it is definitely a marginal increase in that sense of the capacity utilization. The third component that's supposed to come in your macro identity is your export sector. I covered for consumption and covered the industry, not even industry, of the export sector. I will come back a little later. I'm just jumping onto the export. The export also not being great because of the global situation. The global situation is war and of the Ukraine. Since Ukraine war onward, there's a kind of geostrategic reasons things are not in our favor in that sense. So now look at the real wages. I'll come back a little later of the fixed capital formation, which is nothing but investment in your macro identities. How does our investment look like? It has been stagnant for a long time. People like Professor Nagaraj, who is an expert on industry, has been arguing for a long time. If you disaggregate our investment, particularly the investment that goes on the manufacturing, has been stagnant for a long time. Of course, investment definitely there has been upstream with the capital expenditure, capex for last for few budgets has been added, which definitely pushed up the infrastructure aspect, which contributed. But if you look at the overall, our investment rate has been not promising. But last year, with compared to this year, there has been upstick, which is what mentioned not only in the survey, also mentioned in the monetary committee by Seshadri. In fact, was the ex-director here who actually reported this in the last monetary committee at RBI. So definitely there has been improvement, but still it's been a stagnant question. So now, how do you turn around this? How do you actually induce your personal consumption? How do you induce your investment in the big? I mean, it has to come from any budget discussion, as to with whatever the channels, as to end of the day, get here of pushing this numbers. Even if you take the rural, which is again part of the consumption, which clearly mentioned, Mr. Suresh mentioned, of the employment and also the reverse migration question, which is in the sense you also mentioned, Aishwarya also mentioned of the women participation in the labour market, which are largely some of the aspects one can say the supply side interventions, but largely are the demand side interventions. In the sense, if you had been the revival of demand, perhaps this labour who have left the city would have come back. Even that the Aishwarya, that the number that you mentioned for the participation, increased participation women in the labour market, it has largely come in the agriculture sector. Increase in the labour in the agriculture sector is not seen as a progressive across the world. Remember, nowhere in the world country can call itself developed when it does not reduce its labour in agriculture. Structural transformation essentially means pushing out labour from agriculture to non-agriculture, having more industrial investment, more non-farm employment. So in that sense, you don't see that has been happening. But definitely, if you look at the nominal wages, that's what the report says, it's been much relatively better. But again, if you look at the agriculture growth number, it's not promising. It's just 1.4%. Look at your average growth of the economy is 6.5, 6 plus, whereas you are. Can you just take some water here? So your growth rate is 6 plus and 7.2, I guess, exactly, to be precise. But whereas your agriculture growth is 1.4. You can't have this differential when you have labor force. 43% of PLFS says 43% of your labor is still concentrated in agriculture. You can't have this growth and run rate. So then there is something, again, get back to the our original equation. This is the macro identity. The growth has to come from either from consumption, investment, or the export. Export is not promising for given the international condition. So the growth largely has to come from either from the private consumption of the C or your I, which is your investment earning. So that is where the intervention is supposed to take place. Now look at this figures further. So what is that status of today of the hour? What is the way that one can do? The day way is to influence via G. G is your government expenditure, through which you can manipulate it. Manipulate in the sense in a positive way of induce or put in money in purchasing, increase the purchasing power, or enhance the consumption, or enhance the capacity of the industry, whichever way, that has to come via G. So what is the size of the government? Is the size of the government has been increasing. Look at these figures last, I am providing from 2018 to 2024. If you look at it, is definitely from 11.0%, which is a tax GDP ratio. Remember, this is not your expenditure. Expenditure, which actually, what expenditure would be more than this, because the union government runs fiscal deficit. In the sense, it spends more than it's what it receives via tax. Look at the first. Let's look at the tax size, which is size of the government in a partly. If you don't add the expenditure part, which is from 11%, it has definitely been improving. It has gone up to 11.8% in particularly 2024 and 2025. Then look at the correspondingly your fiscal deficit, which has come down, particularly if you look at from the last year, from 5.8 to 4.9. So your tax GDP ratio has gone up from 11.6 to 11.8, which is marginally 2 percentage point, 0.02 percentage point. Fiscal deficit has come down from 5.8 to 4.9%. Now, one of the economic students must tell me now, whether our expenditure share has gone up, has come down. You have a fiscal deficit number, you have a tax GDP number. So the expenditure GDP ratio has gone up, as expended, or remained the same, has come down. Who would tell me this figure? Arya? See, just add up. If your total expenditure, because your fiscal deficit, which is exactly what Mr. Suresh has been mentioning, that fiscal rectitude or fiscal conservatism or fiscal prudence. But big numbers, of course, you have allocation. Definitely, what has happened then? Size of the expenditure more or less remain the same. So what has happened then? The number so much allocation. So therefore, we have to be mindful. Economic students should be mindful when somebody uses the absolute numbers. Should not be using the absolute. You need to look at. Of course, you can take the absolute numbers. Absolute numbers does not tell us the magnitude. You have to look at the ratios. If someone says 20 lakh crore, so what do you mean by 20 lakh crore? Is it something to do with the GDP? Is that you have to standardize. Because it can be number, can be anything. Because it's just a number. So unless number acquires value, when you convert that number into some standardized measure, either you take the ratio of something, of some denominator, that acquires meaning to it. So in that context, if you put these numbers, all of these numbers, the big numbers that all put it in a simple equation, which tells us clearly, definitely our tax GDP ratio has gone up. But you also control your fiscal deficit. That means you kept your expenditure part and controlled or even marginally reduced it. So now with this, how do we see the budget? Now I have provided you the status of the economy from the economic survey and the size of the government fiscal deficit. So what is the takeaways? I don't have any numbers for the takeaway. I have not put here because it's already been covered by Arya and Aishwarya. I just say the one definitely we see the first takeaway. Size of the budget almost remain the same. There is an expected. Maybe if there is a off record deficit, there's also possibility of mobilizing revenue, which is, I don't know whether the disinvestment all comes into, there's a other way of calculating, but whether the government is looking at that source of the revenue, we don't know. Unless that comes, we can safely argue that this budget is the size seems to be the same, remain same. Positive thing, definitely there has been an increase in the MSP, which is definitely as an important, I would think as a positive intervention. We should appreciate that definitely. And I think also the income tax regime, which is seen as a, allows more disposable income at the hands of salaried people, right? Because a new tax regime is supposed to provide, tax, call as a tax cut in a partly in a different way. But naturally, on balance, it provides more disposable income in the hands of people. That actually one can think of influencing our private consumption. If you think of, again, get back to your old identity. If the personal consumption is the one of the C component, influencing your, call as a multiplier or a, demand side, influencing your output, which is via perhaps this. But question is, you need to think of what is the base of this income tax, the base of the income tax, income tax persons, the number of people who pay the income tax.
The SSCs.
Yes?
Income tax SSCs.
The taxes, yeah, the numbers. So you have to think of how much that can influence your private consumption. That depends on, I don't have numbers, somebody has to do the calculation.
3 crores. 3 crores.
3 crore population, 3 crore households.
No.
That means that the entire household of 3 crore, let's say 3 crore households, we have to think of how much that would turn and after increase the personal consumption, something we need to calculate. But that's, I think, looks like for me, is that way to influence. If there is no other way of influencing the C, this could be one way of influencing your consumption in the equation. Then, of course, my MSME, which nicely articulated by Mr. C.K. Mohan, the reforms in the MSME, would one think of turning in that way of definitely making progress in that. We yet to be seen those interventions because just began those interventions. We don't see, because if you look at the number of the manufacturing, it looks like this year of the growth of the manufacturing, it's something 9%. Why is 9% increase this year? It's specifically because the last year it was a negative. The base effect was so low, so the negative. Therefore, suddenly you see the increase. That's definitely welcoming, but should not be seen, that's what you have to see where it comes from, what is the magnitude, what is the base level. So that the base level was so low last year, it gets -2. So therefore, it actually turned out to be your 9+. Otherwise, your growth rate of 6.1 would have not come, because it come purely partly because of the manufacturing, because your agriculture growth rate is less than 2%. Either it should have come from your manufacturing or from your service sector. So why it has come here is because last year you had a negative growth in the manufacturing. And the skilling and employment generation again is seen as a very important intervention, which is, I would think, in the supply side. So the question is that again, it reminds, this is again, I don't have a judgment on the budget, I don't want to make, but I leave to the students, given this magnitude of your crisis, whether supply side intervention by skilling or by this kind of incentive subsidies would alone restore your economy on the path of structural transformation that India needs now is the question that I leave it to you all to decide. Thank you for making this.
Thank you so much. And we have